Hello, welcome to Untold Travel Stories. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey across the world, from one end of the earth to the other, told in a way you've never heard before. Dim the lights in your room, lean back, and let the sound of this video carry you. I arrived in Athens from the sea, a small boat. I do not remember finding it. I do not remember the crossing, only the arrival. The way I always arrive now, as if the journey between places happens in a fold of time that my mind cannot open. I only remember the harbor, Piraeus. I knew the name from somewhere very old, a name that tasted like salt and pine resin and something metallic, the taste of ancient coins maybe, or the taste of a word that has been spoken by millions of tongues over thousands of years. The harbor was full of boats, not moving, not manned, just there. Dozens of them, fishing boats painted in blue and white and red, their hulls crusted with barnacles, their ropes frayed, their masts leaning at angles that told of years without hands to straighten them. I climbed out of my small boat onto the stone quay. The stone was warm, the sun was already high, and the light of Greece hit me. I have seen many kinds of light on this journey, the heavy amber light of India, the grey filtered light of Lima, the thin pale light of Iceland, the fierce white light of the Sahara, but the light of Greece was none of these. The light of Greece was clear, perfectly clear, as if the air had been cleaned with a cloth, polished like glass, and every object in the world was being seen for the first time. The edges of things were sharp, the colors of things were true, the shadows were crisp and dark, and exactly where they should be. This was the light that the ancient Greeks had thought in, the light that had given birth to philosophy, to geometry, to the idea that the world could be understood by looking at it carefully enough. And standing in this light on this stone quay, I understood why. Because in this light you could not hide, you could not blur, you could not pretend. Everything was exactly what it was, and the only possible response to such clarity was to think clearly. I walked from the harbor into the city. Athens was large, not as large as Cairo, not as sprawling as Mexico City, but large enough that walking through it took most of the day. The streets were a mix of old and new, modern apartment buildings, their balconies draped with dead plants, small Byzantine churches wedged between taller buildings, their domes barely visible from the street. Graffiti on some walls, words in Greek, letters I could partially read, because the Greek alphabet was the ancestor of alphabets I had known in other lives. And everywhere, stray cats. More cats than I had seen in any city since Tuscany. They lay in patches of shade, on top of walls, under parked cars, on the steps of churches. They watched me pass with the supreme indifference that only cats possess. I stopped to look at one, a grey cat with green eyes sitting on a windowsill. The cat looked at me. I looked at the cat. The cat blinked, slowly, once. I had read somewhere, or known from some life, that a slow blink from a cat is a sign of trust. I blinked back, slowly. The cat turned its head and looked away. Conversation over, trust established, nothing more to say. I walked deeper into the city, and then I saw it, rising above the rooftops, above the apartment buildings and the churches and the billboards and the power lines, a hill, a flat-topped hill, made of pale stone, and on top of the hill columns, white columns, standing against the blue sky, broken, some of them, but standing, the Acropolis. I climbed the hill. The path wound up through pine trees and wild olive trees and rocky outcrops. The stone beneath my feet was worn smooth, worn by millions of feet over thousands of years. Every step I took had been taken before. By Socrates, maybe, by Plato, by ordinary Athenians going up to pray to gods whose names I half remembered. Athena, Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo. The gods were gone now, not just from this hill, from everywhere. Whatever gods had once watched over this world had looked away, or closed their eyes, or simply moved on. But the hill remained, and the columns remained. I came through the gate at the top, the Propylaea, a grand entrance, half in ruins. Through it, the full view of the Parthenon opened up. I stopped walking. I had to stop. Because what I was seeing was too much to see while moving. The Parthenon. I had seen pyramids. I had seen Machu Picchu. I had seen the carved Buddhas of Bamiyan and the minarets of Cairo and the underground cities of Cappadocia. But the Parthenon was different. The Parthenon was not trying to overwhelm me. It was not trying to impress me. It was not reaching for the sky or burying itself in the earth. The Parthenon was simply standing, in perfect proportion, in perfect balance, in perfect relationship to the hill beneath it, and the sky above it, and the city spread around it. It was not too big and not too small, not too tall and not too wide, not too ornate and not too plain. It was exactly right, and being exactly right, in a world where nothing else was exactly right, where everything was broken or tilted or crumbling or lost, was the most moving thing I had seen. I walked toward it. I walked between the columns. Each column was slightly curved, not straight. I knew this fact from somewhere. The ancient Greeks had built curves into their straight lines, because a perfectly straight line seen from a distance looks as if it sags in the middle, so they had added a tiny curve, a bulge in the center of each column, a slight lean inward, so that the building would look straight to the human eye. They had adjusted reality to match perception. They had bent the truth so that the truth would look true. This was not deception. This was empathy. This was understanding that the person looking at the building mattered as much as the building itself. That architecture is not just about stone. It is about the eyes that see the stone. I sat down on a fallen piece of marble inside the Parthenon, or what was left of the inside. The roof was gone, the walls were gone, only the columns remained, and the platform they stood on, and a few pieces of the carved frieze that had once wrapped around the top. The sky was my ceiling, blue, deep blue, the Greek blue that is bluer than any other blue, and through the columns I could see the city below, the white buildings, the green hills, the sea in the distance, the islands faintly visible on the horizon. I sat there for a very long time. I did not write. I did not take the watch from my pocket. I did not think about Em or Elena or Anna or the 1,000 other ghosts that walked beside me. I only sat inside the Parthenon, in the Greek light, with the Greek blue above me and the Greek stone beneath me. And I felt that this building, this broken, roofless, wall-less building, was the most complete thing I had ever been inside, because completeness has nothing to do with wholeness. A thing does not need all its pieces to be complete. The Parthenon was missing its roof, its walls, its statues, its paint. Yes, it had once been painted in bright colors, not the white marble we imagine. All of that was gone. And yet it was complete. Because the idea of the Parthenon, the proportion, the balance, the empathy built into every curve, that idea was still here, still standing, still exactly right. An idea cannot be broken. An idea cannot crumble. An idea, once it has been thought clearly enough, stands forever. That evening, I watched the sunset from the Acropolis. The city below turned gold, the sea turned silver, the islands on the horizon turned dark blue, then black. And the columns of the Parthenon, the white columns in the last light, turned the color of honey, of amber, of warm skin. For a few minutes, the building looked alive, as if the stone had remembered what it was like to be warm, to be touched, to be loved. Then the light faded, and the columns returned to white, to marble, to stone. But for those few minutes, those few brief, perfect minutes, I had seen what the ancient Athenians had seen every evening. The building coming alive in the last light. The stone remembering warmth. I slept that night on the hill, beneath the columns, on the warm marble. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. I will come back to you, M. The ticking was there. Faint. Barely there. A ghost rhythm. We are in Greece, I said to the watch. On the Acropolis. Beneath the Parthenon. The gods are gone. But the building is still standing. And the light is still clear. And the stone is still warm. Maybe that is what M wanted me to see. Not the gods. The light. Not the answers. The clarity. The watch ticked. Once, I closed it. I closed my eyes. The marble was warm beneath my back. The stars were sharp above my face. I slept. I left Athens heading northwest. The road climbed through hills, covered in olive trees and pine. The air smelled of resin and thyme and warm stone. The sun was constant, the light was constant. That impossible Greek clarity, following me everywhere. I walked for 3 days, through small towns with stone houses and empty cafes, through valleys where wildflowers grew in colors I had never seen, a purple that was almost black, a yellow that was almost orange, a white that was almost blue. In one town I found a small bakery. Inside, the oven was cold, but on a shelf there were jars of honey, thick, golden, crystallized at the edges but still liquid in the center. I opened one. I dipped my finger in. I tasted it. Thyme honey, the honey of Greece. Made by bees that fed on the wild thyme that grew on every hillside in this country. The taste was extraordinary. Not just sweet, complex, deep, with a bitterness underneath the sweetness that made the sweetness more real. The way shadows make light more visible. I ate honey with my fingers, standing in the doorway of the bakery, looking out at the hills. And I thought about the bees, still alive somewhere, still making honey, still doing their ancient work without knowing that the people who had tended them and harvested their honey and spread it on bread every morning were gone. The bees did not need us. They never had. They had been making honey for millions of years before we arrived, and they would continue for millions of years after. We had only been their guests, and now the guests had left. And the bees continued. I arrived at Delphi on the 4th day. The ruins were built into the side of a mountain. Below them, a valley filled with olive trees, thousands of olive trees, silver green, stretching down to the coast. Above them, bare rock, cliffs, and higher still, the peaks of Mount Parnassus, snow on the highest points even in this season. Delphi. The ancient Greeks had believed this was the center of the world, the navel of the earth. Zeus had sent 2 eagles flying from opposite ends of the world, and they had met here at this exact spot, and Zeus had placed a stone, the omphalos, to mark the center of the world. I walked through the ruins, along the sacred way, the path that pilgrims had once walked, climbing from the entrance to the temple of Apollo at the top. The path was lined with the remains of monuments, pedestals where statues had once stood, small buildings that had once been treasuries filled with offerings from cities across the Greek world. All of it in ruins now. But the path was still there, the slope was still the same, the view was still the same, and I was still a pilgrim, walking upward, towards something. I reached the temple of Apollo. Only the foundation remained, and 6 columns standing in a row. Tall, slender, made of pale stone that caught the light in a way that made them glow. This was where the oracle had spoken. The most famous oracle in the ancient world. People had come from every corner of the Mediterranean to ask her questions about war, about marriage, about the future. And the oracle had answered in riddles, mostly in phrases that could be interpreted many ways. The ancient Greeks had understood that the truth is never simple, that an answer that can only mean one thing is probably not the right answer. I stood among the 6 remaining columns, and I thought about the most famous thing the oracle had ever said, or rather the most famous thing that had been carved into the stone of this temple. 2 words. In Greek, Gnothi soton, know thyself. I stood there for a long time, thinking about those 2 words, know thyself. I had been walking for years across continents, through deserts and forests and mountains and cities, and in all that walking I had not learned who I was. I still did not know my name. I still did not know where I came from. I still did not know who M was. But I knew something. I knew how I walked. I knew how I sat. I knew how I looked at a river. I knew how I held a cup of tea. I knew how I listened to silence. Maybe that was what knowing yourself meant, not knowing facts about yourself, not knowing your name or your history or your address, knowing how you are in the world, how you move through it, how you receive it, how you give back to it, I knew these things. I had learned them step by step, country by country, silence by silence. Maybe I knew myself after all. I sat among the columns until the sun was low. Then I climbed higher, past the temple, past the theatre, a stone semicircle cut into the mountainside where plays had once been performed. The seats were still there, row after row of stone benches, curving around the stage. I sat in the highest row. I looked down at the empty stage, and I imagined a performance. Actors in masks, a chorus chanting in unison, a story about gods and humans and the terrible, beautiful things that happen when the two collide. The Greeks had invented theatre here, in places like this. They had understood that telling stories was not entertainment. Telling stories was how you made sense of the world, how you turned chaos into meaning, how you took the raw, overwhelming, terrifying experience of being alive and shaped it into something you could hold. I was doing the same thing, this whole journey, this walking, this notebook, this endless conversation with the silence. I was making a story, out of the raw material of an empty world, and the story was not for anyone. The story was for itself. The story existed because stories must exist, because without stories, the world is just things. With stories, the world is a place. I left Delphi the next morning, walking north and east, toward the mountains, toward a place where stone and sky met in a way I had never imagined. Before I left, I stopped at the omphalos, the stone that marked the center of the world. It was a small stone, round, carved with a net-like pattern. Sitting on a pedestal, I touched it, the center of the world, under my hand, and I smiled, because in an empty world, the center of the world is wherever you are standing. I want to pause here for just a moment. If this story has found you, if these words are walking with you tonight, please consider subscribing to this channel and leaving a like on this video. You don't need to say anything. Just the click is enough. It tells me you're there, and knowing you are there is the reason I keep walking. Thank you. Now let us go higher, to the stones that float in the sky. The road north from Delphi took me through a Greece I had not expected. Not the Greece of blue sea and white islands. A different Greece, a mainland Greece, a Greece of mountains and forests and wide plains, where the wind moved through golden wheat that no one would ever harvest. I walked through the plain of Thessaly, flat, vast, agricultural land. The soil was dark and rich. Crops had gone wild, wheat and barley and sunflowers, growing wherever they pleased, without the discipline of furrows and irrigation. The sunflowers here reminded me of Bulgaria, of the very beginning, the bowed heads, the silent waiting. But these sunflowers were different. These sunflowers were not bowed. They were standing tall, facing the sun, still doing what sunflowers do. Maybe the Bulgarian sunflowers had been mourning. Maybe these Greek sunflowers had not yet heard the news. Or maybe sunflowers, like all living things, respond to what is in front of them. And what was in front of these sunflowers was the sun. And the sun was still here, so they faced it. After 3 days crossing the plain, I saw them. At first I did not understand what I was seeing. Rocks, enormous rocks, rising from the flat plain like the fingers of a buried giant reaching up through the earth. Tall, narrow, vertical, their sides sheer, their tops flat, dozens of them, scattered across the edge of the plain where the mountains began. Some of them were 100 meters tall, some taller. They looked like they had been placed there by something much larger than nature, by a hand that worked on a scale beyond human comprehension. And on top of some of these rocks, on the very tops, where no human should be able to reach, there were buildings, monasteries. Meteora, the name meant suspended in the air. And that was exactly what these monasteries were. Suspended, hanging, floating on top of impossible pillars of stone. Monks had built them. Centuries ago, they had climbed these sheer rock faces with ropes, with ladders, with faith, and they had built their homes at the top, because they wanted to be closer to God, because they wanted to be away from the world, because they believed that the higher you go, the clearer your prayers become. I stood at the base of one of the pillars and looked up. The rock was grey, smooth in places, rough in others, shaped by millions of years of wind and rain into something that looked organic, like bone, like the trunk of a petrified tree. And at the top, far, far above me, a monastery, red-roofed, stone-walled, with a small bell tower and a balcony that hung over the edge of the cliff, looking out across the valley. I found a path. Not the original path. The original monks had been hauled up in nets, hanging from ropes over the void, but over the centuries, stairs had been carved into the rock. Narrow, steep, winding around the pillar like a spiral staircase. I climbed. The stairs were cut deep into the stone. Each step was narrow enough that only 1 foot could fit. I pressed my hands against the rock wall on one side. On the other side, nothing, air. A drop of 100 meters. I did not look down. I looked at the stone in front of me at the next step, and the next, and the next. This is how you climb something impossible. You do not look at the top. You do not look at the bottom. You look at the next step, and you take it. When I reached the top, I stepped through a small wooden door and into a courtyard. Small, quiet, stone walls on 3 sides. On the 4th side, the edge of the cliff, and beyond the edge, nothing. Just air, and far below, the green plain of Thessaly, stretching to the horizon. A few pots of geraniums sat on the courtyard wall, dead, brown, their soil dry and cracked. But the pots were still there, placed carefully, evenly spaced. By someone who had cared about beauty even in a place this remote. I explored the monastery. It was small. A chapel, a refectory, a dining hall with a long wooden table and benches, a kitchen with a stone oven, a few cells, tiny rooms barely large enough for a bed and a desk, and a library. The library stopped me. It was a small room. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, and on the shelves, books, old books, very old. Some of them were manuscripts handwritten on parchment with ink that had faded to brown. Some had illustrations, small, detailed paintings of saints and angels, their gold halos still faintly shining. These books had been here for centuries. In this room, on this rock. Above the world, monks had copied them by hand, word by word, letter by letter, sitting in their small cells by candlelight, dipping their pens in ink, writing the words of other men who had lived centuries before them. A chain of hands, stretching back through time, each hand copying what the hand before it had written, preserving, carrying, passing on, and now the chain was broken. The last monk had left, or had died, or had simply stopped writing, but the books were still here. I took one down from the shelf, carefully. It was heavy. The parchment was thick. The cover was wooden, bound in leather. I opened it. Greek. Ancient Greek. I could not read it. But I recognized some letters, some words, and I recognized the care with which each letter had been formed. The steadiness of the hand, the patience of the pen. This book had taken months to write, maybe a year. 1 monk, 1 pen, 1 candle, 1 year of his life poured into these pages, and the book was still here, still legible, still carrying whatever truth the monk had been trying to preserve. I held the book for a long time. Then I placed it back on the shelf, gently, in the exact spot where it had been. Some things must stay where they are. I walked to the edge of the courtyard. I looked out over the valley. The view was enormous. I could see for maybe 50 kilometers in every direction. The plain below, the mountains in the distance, other pillars of rock, with other monasteries perched on top. The whole landscape arranged like a painting, but a painting made by time and geology, not by a human hand. And I understood why the monks had come here, not just to be close to God, not just to be away from the world to see. From up here, you could see the whole world, and when you can see the whole world, you understand something you cannot understand from below. That the world is one thing. Not many things. One thing. The plain and the mountains and the rivers and the sky and the rock you are standing on, all one thing. Connected, continuous, unbroken. The monks had come up here to see the unity, and they had stayed because once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and you do not want to go back down to the place where you had not yet seen it. I spent 2 nights at the monastery. I slept in one of the monks' cells, on a wooden bed barely wider than my body, with a single small window that looked east toward the sunrise. On the first morning I woke before dawn. I went to the window. I watched the light come. First the sky changed, from black to dark blue to grey to pale gold. Then the plain below began to appear, slowly, as if it were being painted, stroke by stroke, by the light itself. And then the sun crested the mountains to the east, and the first beam of light hit the monastery, hit the stone wall beside my window, hit my face, and I felt for just a moment what the monks must have felt every morning for centuries: the first light, the first warmth, the first proof that the world had not ended in the night, that the sun had chosen to return. One more time, on the second evening, I sat in the chapel. It was small, dark. The walls were covered in frescoes, paintings of saints with halos, angels with wings, Christ with his hand raised in blessing. The paint was old, cracked in places, but the faces were still clear. I sat on a wooden stool in the center of the chapel. I looked at the faces on the walls, and I thought about all the faces I had seen on this journey, all the painted saints and carved Buddhas and mosaic Christs that had watched me from the walls of churches and temples and caves across the world. They were all the same face, different features, different styles, different centuries, but the same face. The face of patience, the face of waiting, the face of someone who has something to say and is willing to wait forever for you to be ready to hear it. I was ready now, I thought, but the face on the wall did not speak. The faces never spoke, they only watched. And their watching was the message. I see you, I have always seen you, I will always see you. You do not need to do anything, you do not need to say anything. Just be here, just be seen. That is enough. I left the monastery in the morning. I climbed down the carved stairs, step by step, not looking down, not looking up, just the next step. At the bottom, I turned and looked up one last time. The monastery was a small shape at the top of an enormous pillar of stone, red roof, white walls, a bell tower no bigger than my thumb from this distance. And as I watched, a wind came from the valley, and the bell in the tower, I heard it, faintly, very faintly. The wind had pushed it, and it had rung, once one clear, thin note, falling down from the sky, landing softly on the plain. I caught it, in my ears, in my chest, in whatever part of me was still capable of being surprised by beauty, and I carried it with me as I walked north. I reached Thessaloniki after 4 days of walking north through the plain. The city appeared gradually, first a few buildings on the horizon, then more buildings, then a waterfront, a long curving waterfront, facing south, toward a bay that opened onto the Aegean Sea. Thessaloniki was different from Athens. Athens had been ancient and modern at the same time, layers upon layers, the Acropolis rising above apartment blocks, the past and the present fighting for space. Thessaloniki was calmer, more settled, a city that had found its rhythm centuries ago and had never felt the need to change it. The waterfront was long and wide, a promenade of pale stone stretching along the bay. On one side the city, cafes and shops and apartment buildings with iron balconies. On the other side, the sea, flat, calm, silver in the afternoon light. I walked along the promenade. At the far end there was a tower, a round, white stone tower, old, thick-walled, standing at the water's edge like a chess piece that had been placed there and forgotten. The White Tower. I knew the name from somewhere. I walked to it. I went inside. I climbed the spiral staircase to the top. From the top of the White Tower I could see the whole city. Thessaloniki was built on a hillside that sloped down to the sea. The buildings were stacked, the lower ones near the water, the higher ones climbing the hill, and at the very top of the hill, the old walls of the Byzantine fortress. The city looked as if it had been poured down the hillside, like water, like honey, starting at the fortress and flowing downward, building by building, until it reached the sea and spread out along the waterfront. And the sea received it, gently, without resistance, the way the sea receives everything. I came down from the tower. I walked through the city. I found a market, an old covered market. Glass roof, iron frame, like a greenhouse, but for food instead of plants. Inside the market, the stalls were still arranged: butchers, fishmongers, cheese sellers, olive sellers, each stall with its own little world. The food was gone, mostly, but the smells remained, faintly, in the wood of the counters, in the stone of the floors, the smell of olives, of cheese, of dried fish, of the herbs that had been hung in bundles from the ceiling. I walked through the market slowly, breathing in, and I found on one counter a jar of olives, sealed, still good. I opened it. I ate one. The taste was sharp, salty, bitter, and underneath, a richness that only time can give. These olives had been curing in their brine for years, getting better, getting deeper, getting more themselves. Some things improve with neglect. Some things become their truest selves only when left alone. I ate several more olives, standing in the empty market, in the filtered light of the glass roof, tasting the patience of salt and time. In the afternoon, I walked up the hill toward the old fortress, the Byzantine walls. The walls were thick, stone, dark grey, built to withstand sieges, to hold an empire together, to keep the barbarians out and the civilization in. The barbarians had come anyway. They always did, and the civilization had fallen. It always did, but the walls remained. I walked along the top of the walls, looking out on one side at the city below, on the other side at the countryside beyond, hills and olive groves, and in the far distance, the shape of a mountain, Mount Olympus maybe, the home of the gods. I sat on the wall, my legs hanging over the city side, and I took out my notebook. Thessaloniki, a city that pours into the sea, a market that still smells of olives, a wall that outlasted the civilization it was built to protect. I'm beginning to think that protection is not the point. The wall did not save the empire fell, but the wall remained, and the wall became something new, not a defense, a memory. A reminder that someone once cared enough about what was inside to build something this strong around it. The wall is not protecting anything anymore. The wall is honoring what it once protected, and that honoring is a kind of love that outlasts the thing it loves. I closed the notebook. That evening I sat at a cafe on the waterfront, not inside the cafe, at one of the outdoor tables. On the promenade, facing the sea, the table still had a small menu holder on it, laminated, with photos of coffee and pastries and descriptions in Greek and English. I looked at the menu. Greek coffee, Freddo espresso, bougatsa, baklava. I imagined ordering, imagined a waiter appearing, imagined saying, "Greek coffee, please, medium sweet." No waiter came, but the sea came. The sea was always there. The sea was the waiter who never went home, who was always ready to bring you what you needed. Not coffee, not food, but the view, the sound, the salt air, the sense of being at the edge of something vast and calm and indifferent. I sat at the table until the stars came out, then I walked back into the city. I found a small apartment on a quiet street. I went inside. I lay on the bed. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. "I will come back to you." The ticking was barely perceptible now. I had to press the watch hard against my ear and hold my breath completely to hear it. One tick. A silence so long I thought the tick had been my imagination. Then another tick. "We are going to the islands tomorrow," I said to the watch. "To the sea, to the places where the land breaks apart and becomes something else, where solid ground gives up and lets the water in." The watch ticked once more. I closed it. I closed my eyes. The sound of the sea, distant but present, came through the open window. I slept. I reached Crete by boat, a small fishing boat I found in a harbour south of Athens. The crossing took 2 days, maybe 3. The sea was calm. The wind was steady. The boat knew the way, or the current knew the way, and the boat simply followed. I slept on the floor of the boat at night, with the stars above me and the gentle rocking of the Aegean beneath me. The rocking was like the hammock in Merida, like the reed boat on Titicaca, like every gentle holding I had ever received from the world. I saw Crete on the morning of the third day. It rose from the sea like something surfacing, like a whale, like a memory, long and mountainous. Its peaks covered in cloud, its coast rocky and wild. I brought the boat into a small bay on the northern coast. I tied it to a rock. I climbed ashore. The air on Crete was different from the mainland. Warmer, more fragrant. The scent of wild herbs was everywhere: thyme, oregano, sage, rosemary. The hillsides were covered in these herbs, growing wild among the rocks and the olive trees. The whole island smelled like a kitchen, like someone had been cooking with these herbs for so long that the land itself had absorbed the scent. I walked inland, following old stone paths that wound through olive groves and past ruined farmhouses. The olive trees here were ancient. Some of them were 1,000 years old, maybe 2,000. Their trunks were twisted into shapes that looked like frozen shouts, like bodies caught in the middle of a dance. I stopped beside one of these ancient trees. I put my hand on its trunk. The bark was rough, warm, deeply grooved, like the skin of a very old hand. "You were here before me," I said. "You will be here after me. What have you learned?" The tree did not answer, but a small wind moved through its silver-green leaves. A whisper, a breath. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the answer was just the breath, just the being here, just the standing still for 1,000 years and letting the wind speak through you. I walked for 2 days across the interior of Crete. The landscape was harsh, beautiful but harsh. Rocky hills, deep gorges, small plateaus covered in wildflowers, and always the scent of herbs. On the second day, I came to a place I recognized. Not from this life, from somewhere deeper, from some story that had been told so many times it had become part of the air. Knossos. The ruins of Knossos spread across a low hillside. Not a temple, not a fortress, a palace. The palace of King Minos, the legendary palace that held the labyrinth, the maze where the Minotaur, half man, half bull, had been kept, where Theseus had entered with a ball of thread, had killed the monster, and had followed the thread back out. The story was 4,000 years old, maybe older, and it might never have happened. It might have been just a story, just a way of talking about the things that live inside us, the monsters we keep hidden, the mazes we build to contain them, the thread of courage we must hold to find our way back out. I walked through the ruins. The palace was enormous, room after room, corridor after corridor, staircase after staircase. Some parts had been partially reconstructed, concrete columns painted red, walls rebuilt to show what they might have once looked like. The reconstructions looked strange, too clean, too sure of themselves. The ruins around them looked more honest. I walked deeper into the palace, into the parts that had not been reconstructed, into the parts that were still broken, still uncertain, still asking questions instead of answering them, and I found the corridors, narrow, stone, turning and turning and turning, left, right, left again, dead end, back, right, left, a labyrinth, or what remained of one. I walked into it, without thread, without a plan, without any way of knowing how to get back out, because that was the point. The labyrinth was not a punishment. I understood this now. The labyrinth was a teaching. The teaching was this: you will get lost, you will turn wrong, you will reach dead ends, you will want to give up, but if you keep walking, if you keep turning, if you keep choosing, even when every choice looks the same, you will find the center. And in the center, there will be something waiting for you. Not a monster. That was the old story. The version told by people who were afraid of what they would find. In the real labyrinth, the labyrinth of a life, what waits in the center is yourself. I walked the corridors for a long time, an hour, maybe 2. I got lost. Of course I got lost. That was the design. But I did not panic. I did not rush. I just walked, turn by turn, choosing a direction each time. Not because I knew it was right, because choosing was the only thing to do, and eventually, after many wrong turns, many dead ends, many moments of standing still and breathing and choosing again, I came to a small room. The center, the room was square, small, the walls were stone, The ceiling was low, and on one wall, faded, barely visible, but still there, a painting. A bull, not a minotaur, not a monster, a bull, beautiful, powerful, its body painted in flowing lines, its horns curved, its eyes large and calm. The Minoans had loved bulls. They had not feared them. They had danced with them, young men and women leaping over the horns of charging bulls, in a ritual that was part sport, part prayer, part art. They had danced with the thing that could kill them, and they had made it beautiful. I stood in front of the bull for a long time, and I thought about all the things on this journey that could have killed me. The desert, the cold, the altitude, the loneliness. And I had danced with all of them. Not gracefully, not always successfully, but I had danced, I had kept moving, I had not stood still and waited for the horns to find me. I had danced, I found my way out of the labyrinth. It took less time than getting in. Because once you have found the center, the way out is not the reverse of the way in. The way out is a different path entirely. A path that only appears after you have stopped looking for it. That evening I sat on the hill above Knossos, looking down at the ruins. The sun was setting. The stone walls turned gold. The reconstructed columns turned red. The sea, visible in the distance, turned silver. I took out my notebook. I wrote, Knossos the labyrinth. I walked in without thread, and I found the center. In the center there was a bull painted on a wall, not a monster, a dance partner. The Minoans understood that the things we fear are not enemies. They are invitations, invitations to move, to leap, to dance. The labyrinth is not a trap, the labyrinth is a dance floor, and the only way to get through it is to keep dancing. I closed the notebook. A small gecko crawled across the stone beside me. It stopped. It looked at me with its tiny, ancient eyes. Then it continued on its way. Even the gecko was dancing, in its own small way, across the warm stone, under the setting sun. Without knowing why, without needing to know, I sailed from Crete heading north. The sea between the islands was a deep blue that had no name in any language I knew. Not navy, not cobalt, not sapphire. Something between all of these and beyond all of these. A blue that existed only here, in this particular sea, under this particular light. I sailed for a day and a night, and in the morning, in the very early morning when the sky was still pink, I saw Santorini. It did not look like an island. It looked like an explosion, frozen in time, because that is what Santorini was. 3,000 years ago, a volcano had erupted here, one of the largest eruptions in human history. The center of the island had collapsed into the sea. What remained was a crescent-shaped rim of cliffs, the edge of the caldera, rising 300 meters straight up from the water. And on top of those cliffs, on the very edge, white buildings, hundreds of white buildings clustered together, with blue domes, with narrow staircases climbing between them, with small windows looking out over the abyss. A village built on the rim of a volcano, on the edge of a catastrophe that had happened 30 centuries ago and had never quite ended. I brought my boat into the caldera. The water inside was deep, very deep. The old volcano crater, filled with seawater, was 1,000 meters deep in places. The water was almost black and completely still. I tied the boat to a rock at the base of the cliffs. I looked up. 300 meters of sheer cliff above me, white buildings at the top, blue sky above them, and somehow carved into the face of the cliff, a staircase zigzagging upward, step after step after step, hundreds of steps. I began to climb. The climb took an hour. My legs burned, my lungs struggled, but with every switchback, the view behind me grew more extraordinary. The caldera spread out below, dark blue water, the curve of the cliffs. The small islands in the center, the remains of the volcano, still rising from the water, still building itself, slowly, eruption by eruption. And the light, always the light. That impossible Greek clarity, making everything sharp, everything true, everything exactly what it was. When I reached the top, I stepped into Oya. A village so white it hurt my eyes. Every surface was painted white. The walls, the roofs, the staircases, the ground. White on white on white, as if the village were trying to become part of the light itself, to dissolve into the brightness, to stop being a place and become pure illumination. And against this whiteness, the blue. The domes of the churches painted a deep, saturated blue that was the exact color of the sea below, as if the village had taken the sea and put pieces of it on its rooftops. White and blue, the two colors of Greece, the two colors of this island, the only two colors needed. I walked through the narrow streets of Oia. The streets were not really streets. They were paths, staircases, tunnels, passages between white walls that sometimes opened suddenly onto terraces with views that stopped your heart. The caldera, the sea, the sky, the cliffs, all of it visible through a gap between two white walls, framed like a painting that someone had hung in the most unexpected place. Every few steps, another painting, another view, another gap in the whiteness that revealed the blue. The village had been designed for this, for the constant surprise of beauty, for the way that beauty, when it is hidden and then revealed, is more powerful than beauty that is always visible. I came to a small church, blue dome, white walls, a wooden door, painted blue. I went inside. The interior was tiny. 4 pews, an altar, a few icons on the walls, painted on wood in the Byzantine style, with gold halos and large, watching eyes, and candles. Dozens of thin beeswax candles standing in a box of sand in front of the icons. All of them cold, all of them waiting. I took my lighter from my pocket. I lit one candle. The flame was small, yellow. In the whiteness of the church, it looked like a small sun. And the icon on the wall, a painting of the Virgin Mary, holding the Christ child, came alive in the light. The gold of her halo glowed, the dark of her eyes deepened. The child in her arms seemed to move, just slightly, as the flame flickered. I sat in one of the pews. I watched the candle burn, one candle. In a church the size of a closet, on the edge of a cliff, on the rim of a volcano. In a world with no one left, and yet the candle burned, and the icon watched, and the church held its small space of quiet, the way a cupped hand holds water. I spent 3 days on Santorini. I walked through villages perched on the cliff edge. I climbed staircases that led nowhere. I sat on terraces that overlooked the caldera. I watched the sunsets, the famous Santorini sunsets, where the sun fell into the sea and the sky turned colors that no painter has ever been able to reproduce. On the second evening, I found a small house with a terrace facing west. I sat on the terrace. I watched the sunset. The sky went from blue to gold, to orange, to red, to purple, to a deep, impossible rose that lasted exactly 3 minutes before fading to grey. 3 minutes, the most beautiful 3 minutes of the day, and then they were gone, like the beam of light in Abu Simbel, like the fireflies in Aswan, like every brief, perfect thing on my last morning on Santorini. I stood on the highest point of Oia, looking out at the caldera. The water was still, the sky was clear, the white buildings glowed in the morning light, and I understood something about this island. Santorini had been destroyed 30 centuries ago. An explosion so violent it had changed the climate of the entire world, had wiped out a civilization, had created a caldera that was now 1,000 meters deep, and the people had come back. They had looked at the rim of the crater, at the sheer cliffs, at the evidence of total destruction, and they had said, "Yes, we will build here. We will build our most beautiful village on the edge of the thing that tried to kill us. We will paint it white. We will paint its domes blue. We will make it so beautiful that anyone who sees it will forget that beneath it there is a crater 1,000 meters deep." This was not denial. This was defiance. This was the human insistence on beauty in the face of annihilation. And now the humans were gone, but the beauty remained. On the edge of the cliff, white and blue against the impossible blue of the sea and the sky, beauty as defiance, beauty as survival, beauty as the last word. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. I will come back to you. M. I held the watch up to the view. The caldera, the blue water, the white cliffs. This, I said, this is what coming back looks like. Building on the edge of what destroyed you, painting it white, making it beautiful, coming back. The watch ticked. Once, very faintly, I closed it. I walked back down the cliff. To my boat, I pushed off from the rocks, and I sailed north, toward the next island, the island where no one had ever lived. The sail from Santorini to Delos took most of a day. The wind was strong, coming from the north. The Meltemi, the summer wind of the Aegean. I knew the name from somewhere. A wind that blows steadily, reliably, for weeks at a time. A wind that the ancient sailors had known and respected, and sometimes feared. The boat moved fast. The waves were choppy, small and sharp. They slapped against the hull in a rhythm that was almost musical, a percussion. The drum section of the sea, I saw Delos in the late afternoon, a small island, low, flat, almost no vegetation, just brown rock and dry grass, and scattered across the landscape, white shapes, ruins. The entire island was ruins. Delos had been sacred. I knew this from somewhere deep inside my fragmented memory. Sacred to Apollo, the god of light, the god of music, the god of truth. The ancient Greeks had believed that Apollo was born on this island, and because the island was his birthplace, no one was allowed to be born on it, and no one was allowed to die on it. Pregnant women were taken to a nearby island before they gave birth. The sick and the old were taken away before they died. Delos was a place of pure existence. No beginnings, no endings, only the middle, only the being. And now, in this empty world, it was more purely that than it had ever been. I brought the boat into a small harbor on the western side. I tied it to a stone post that had been placed there 2,000 years ago. The stone was worn smooth by 2,000 years of ropes. I climbed ashore. The island was small enough to walk across in an hour, and everything on it was ruins, temples, houses, marketplaces, theaters, fountains, statues, some of them standing, most of them fallen, columns, hundreds of columns scattered across the ground like the bones of a giant animal, and the famous lions, a row of marble lions, sitting upright on a terrace overlooking a dry lake, their mouths open, their faces worn smooth by wind and rain. They had been sitting here for 2,500 years, guarding the sacred lake, roaring silently at the sky. I walked up to them. I stood in front of the nearest lion. Its face was almost gone. The features had been eroded until what remained was not a lion's face, but the idea of a lion's face. The suggestion, the memory. And somehow the less face it had, the more powerful it seemed. Because what remained was not the details. What remained was the essence, the thing that makes a lion, the fierceness, the watching, the eternal, silent roar. I sat beside the lions for a long time. The wind was strong up here. The Meltemi, it came across the water and hit the island without any obstacle. There were no trees to slow it, no buildings tall enough to block it, just the wind and the stone and me. The wind made a sound as it passed over the ruins. A low, constant note, like the note I had heard in the cathedral in Lima, but older, thinner. The note of wind passing over stones that had been shaped by human hands and then abandoned to the air. Every ruin on this island was a wind instrument. Every column, every wall, every fallen piece of marble, the wind played them all, together, at the same time. The island was an orchestra, and the conductor was the Meltemi. I explored the ruins for 2 days. I walked through the old marketplace, the agora, where traders from across the Mediterranean had once come to buy and sell, where languages had mixed, where the smell of spices and fish and wine had filled the air. Now the agora was just a grid of low walls, outlines, the footprints of buildings that had been grand once and were now just shapes on the ground. I walked through the old residential quarter, where the wealthy citizens had lived. Their houses had mosaic floors. I could see them, partially uncovered, small colored stones arranged into pictures. a dolphin, a trident, a face of Dionysus, the god of wine, wreathed in grape leaves. The mosaics were faded. Some were missing pieces, but the pictures were still recognizable, still telling their small stories to whoever looked down. In one house, I found something that stopped me, a mosaic on the floor of what had been the main room. Not a god, not a dolphin, not a mythological scene. A dog, a small dog, made of tiny colored stones, lying down, its head on its paws, its eyes open, looking at the doorway, waiting. The owner of this house had loved a dog, had loved it enough to put its portrait on the floor, in a place where everyone who entered the house would see it. A dog, waiting by the door, for an owner who would never come home. I knelt beside the mosaic. I looked at the small stone dog for a long time, and I felt, not for the first time, but with a sharpness that surprised me, the weight of all the small loves that had been lost when the world emptied. Not the great loves, not the loves that poets write about. The small loves, the love of a person for a dog, the love of a mother for the particular way her child laughs, the love of a man for the coffee shop on the corner of his street, the love of a woman for the view from her kitchen window. These small loves, billions of them, each one as real as a stone in a mosaic, each one part of a picture that could only be seen when they were all together. And now they were scattered, like the pieces of a mosaic that has been broken apart, each piece still real, still colored, still carrying its small fragment of the picture. But no longer together, no longer making the whole. I left the house. I walked to the eastern shore of the island. I sat on a rock at the water's edge, the Aegean stretched out before me. Blue, endless, dotted with islands, some close, some far, some barely visible on the horizon. Each island was a world. Each island had been inhabited. Each island had its own stories, its own mosaics, its own small dogs waiting by the door, and all of them were empty now. I took out my notebook. I wrote, Delos, the island where no one was born and no one died, the island of pure being. And now, more than ever, it is exactly what it was always meant to be, a place of no beginnings and no endings. Only middles, only the vast, quiet, wind-blown middle of existence. I sat beside the marble lions today. They have been roaring silently for 2,500 years. They will roar silently for 2,500 more, and the wind will continue to play the ruins like an orchestra, and the mosaic dog will continue to wait by the door. And none of this needs me, none of this needs anyone, but I am here and I am listening. And the listening is its own kind of love. I closed the notebook. That night I slept on Delos, in the ruins of a temple, on the warm stone. The wind died down after sunset. The island became very still, very quiet. And the stars of the Aegean, seen from an island with no light pollution, no buildings, no trees, nothing between me and the sky, the stars were overwhelming, not just bright, not just numerous, present. Each one individually present, as if each star were a face looking down, and I could feel its gaze, millions of gazes, millions of faces, looking down at one man, lying on the stone floor of a ruined temple, on a small island in the middle of a sea. I looked back at them. Hello, I said, all of you. Hello. The stars did not answer, but they shone, steadily, patiently, and shining is a kind of answering, the oldest kind. In the morning, I left Delos. I pushed my boat into the water. I set the sail. The Meltemi filled it immediately, pushing me north and west, toward the last island, the island I had been walking toward, sailing toward, without knowing it for the entire journey. Ithaca. I did not plan to go to Ithaca. I did not know I was going to Ithaca until I was already on my way. The wind had taken me northwest from Delos, through the Cyclades, past islands whose names I did not know, past rocks and reefs and small harbors where boats were tied to stones, and no one was coming to untie them. And then, after 2 days of sailing, I saw an island that looked different from the others. It was not flat like Delos, it was not volcanic like Santorini, it was mountainous, green. with steep shores and hidden coves and the dark shapes of cypress trees standing against the sky like tall, thin guardians. And I knew without any sign, without any name, without any proof, that this was Ithaca. Ithaca, the island of Odysseus. The island that a man had spent 10 years trying to reach. The island that had become, in the story that Homer told, the symbol of home, the symbol of return, the symbol of the place you carry inside you, even when you're as far from it as it is possible to be. I had not read the Odyssey, or maybe I had in some other life, but I knew the story. Everyone knows the story. A man goes to war. The war ends. He tries to go home. It takes him 10 years. He faces monsters and gods and temptations and storms. And at the very end, he arrives on a small island in the Western Sea, and he is home. I brought my boat into a small bay on the eastern coast. The water was turquoise in the shallows, dark blue in the deeper parts. The shore was pebbles, small, round, white and grey. The same kind of pebbles I had walked on in Croatia years ago, on the Adriatic coast. The beginning of this whole journey, I stepped out of the boat. My feet touched the pebbles. They clicked and shifted under my weight. The sound was familiar, the most familiar sound in the world. I walked inland, up a path that climbed through olive trees and wild sage and cypress. The island was small, quiet. Even for this empty world, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of sound but the presence of deep, accumulated peace. This island had been quiet for a long time, long before the world emptied. Ithaca had always been a quiet place, a place apart, a place that the rest of the world flowed past without quite touching. I climbed to the top of a hill. I looked out. The sea was on every side, blue, endless, and in every direction, other islands, other shapes of land rising from the water. The Ionian Islands, each one a different shade of green, each one a different silence. I sat on the hilltop, on a flat stone that had been placed there, or had always been there, warm from the sun, and I thought about Odysseus. Odysseus had come home after 20 years, 10 years of war, 10 years of wandering. And when he arrived, no one recognized him. He was older, changed, weathered by the journey. He looked like a beggar, like a stranger. Only his dog recognized him. An old dog lying on a pile of dung outside the palace. The dog had been a puppy when Odysseus left. Now it was ancient, blind, near death. But when Odysseus passed by, even in his disguise, even after 20 years, the dog lifted its head. Its tail moved, once, twice, a recognition that went beyond sight, beyond memory, down to the bone. Then the dog died. I sat on the hilltop and thought about that dog, and I thought about the mosaic dog on Delos, waiting by the door, made of small colored stones, patient, eternal, all the dogs, in all the stories, in all the houses, in all the worlds, waiting. I walked down from the hilltop. I followed the path toward the western side of the island, through olive groves so old the trees looked like twisted sculptures, through clearings where wildflowers grew in colors so bright they seemed to be lit from below, through a small village, stone houses, a church with a bell tower, a fountain in the center of a small square, all of it empty, all of it intact, all of it waiting. I came to the western shore in the late afternoon, a small beach, pebbles again. The water was calm, the sun was beginning its long descent toward the sea. I sat on the pebbles, I took off my shoes, I let the warm stones press against my feet, and I looked at the sea where Odysseus had sailed. The sea he had been lost on for 10 years, the sea that had kept him from home, but also the sea that had brought him home, because the sea in the end had not been his enemy. The sea had been his teacher. Every storm, every monster, every island of temptation, they had all been lessons. Lessons in patience, in humility, in the understanding that you cannot force your way home. You can only keep sailing, and trust that the current will eventually bring you to where you need to be. I had been sailing for years now, not on one sea, on all of them, the Mediterranean, the Pacific, the Caribbean, the Aegean, and now I was here, on the shore of Ithaca, on the island that meant home. But Ithaca was not my home. I had never been here before. I had no memories of this place. No one was waiting for me here. No dog would lift its head when I passed. And yet it felt like home. Because home, I had learned, across all these countries, all these silences, all these thousands of steps, home is not a place you recognize. Home is a place that recognizes you. And this island, this small, quiet, olive-covered island in the Ionian Sea, recognized me. I could feel it in the way the stones fit under my feet, in the way the wind touched my face, in the way the light fell on the water. The island knew me. I did not know how. I did not know why. But the island knew me, and that was enough. I spent many days on Ithaca, more days than I had spent anywhere else on this journey. Maybe a week, maybe 2. I lost count. Counting did not matter here. I walked the entire island. Every path, every hill, every cove. I ate olives from the trees and figs from the bushes, and drank water from the small springs that bubbled up between the rocks. I slept in different places each night, on a beach, in a village house, under an olive tree, on the hilltop where I had sat on the first day, and each night I felt more at home, not because I was recognizing the island, because the island was recognizing me, more and more. Day by day, as if my presence was slowly being absorbed into the stone and the soil and the roots of the olive trees, as if I were becoming part of the landscape. On my last evening, the evening I knew somehow was the last, I went to the western shore again. I sat on the pebbles. I watched the sun set. The sky turned gold, then orange, then the deepest red I had ever seen, deeper than the red of Santorini, deeper than the red of the Peruvian desert, deeper than any red I had words for, and then purple, and then a blue so dark it was almost black, and then the stars. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. I will come back to you. I held it to my ear. I listened. Nothing. Complete silence. The watch had stopped. The last tick had happened somewhere, on some other island, on some other evening, without my noticing. The watch was silent, and I was not sad. I was not afraid. I was not even surprised, because I understood now. The watch had been ticking for as long as I needed it to tick, for as long as I needed a rhythm outside myself, for as long as I needed a question to carry. And now I did not need it anymore. The rhythm was inside me now, in my heartbeat, in my breath, in the step of my feet on stone. The question had been answered, not with a word, not with a fact. With a journey, the answer was the journey itself. I will come back to you. I had come back. To myself, to the world, to the shore of an island that recognized me. Was not a person. Was a direction. Was the compass point that always pointed toward home. And home was wherever I finally stopped running and sat down and said, "Here. This is enough. This is where I belong." I placed the watch on the pebbles, open, facing the sky, facing the stars. I left it there. The way I had left it on cliffs and dunes and walls and towers across the world. But this time felt different. This time felt final, not because the watch was more dead than before, because I was more alive. I stood up. I walked to the edge of the water. I let my feet touch the sea. Cold, clear, alive. The Ionian Sea. The sea of Odysseus. The sea that takes you away and brings you back. The sea that is both the obstacle and the path. I stood in the water for a long time. The stars were reflected on the surface, above me and below me, like Titicaca, like every body of water that had ever held me. I took the tesbih from my pocket, the wooden beads from Cappadocia, the very first gift, the very last thing I still carried. I passed the beads through my fingers. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm. My rhythm. Not the watch's, not the world's, mine. 1, 2, 3. I walked back to the shore. I lay down on the warm pebbles. I looked up at the sky, the Aegean sky, full of stars, full of faces, full of the gazes of everything that had ever existed, and I said to the sky, to the sea, to the island, to the wind, to the olive trees, to the marble lions on Delos, to the mosaic dog, to the frescoes in the monasteries, to the white cliffs of Santorini, to the columns of the Parthenon, to to Elena, to Anna, to every stranger who had ever left a note for someone they would never meet. I am here. I was always here. And being here, just being here, was the whole point. The wind moved across the island, very gently. The olive trees whispered. The pebbles shifted, slightly, under the pull of a small wave, and somewhere very close now, closer than it had ever been, I heard music. Not from far away. Not from a cabin in Siberia, not from a memory. From here, from this island, from the wind itself, from the stones, from the sea, a few notes. Clear, simple, perfect. Then silence, then a few more notes. And this was the first time on all of these journeys, across all of these countries, through all of these silences, I recognized the melody. It was not a piano, it was not an instrument at all. It was the sound of the world itself playing, for no one, for everyone, for the simple joy of sound existing in silence. The melody had always been there. I had just never been quiet enough to hear it, until now. I closed my eyes. I smiled. I let Ithaca hold me, the way every place on this long journey had held me. One more night, one more breath, one more silence, and then whatever came next would be beautiful. I was sure of that now.